If I start selling my kidneys, I'll let you know.
Okay, that's cool. Do I get a friends and family discount?
You are in a maze of twisty little passages, all alike. Time to start a fire, crack open a can of Tab, and settle in for FounderQuest.
I thought originally that this podcast would be called something like Hard Technical Decisions, which sounds pretty hard hitting to me. Like, I like that because I think of myself as like a dyed-in-the-wool realist who's unafraid to face hard facts, you know. But then we were talking about it in Slack, and it turns out that, well, some of the things that I was originally going to highlight as tough, hard technical decisions, or mistakes rather, were actually forms of technical debt that we kind of took on purpose. They were things that we knew what we were getting into. Maybe not exactly to what depth we were getting into them, but we knew that something was happening. And yeah, so this week's topic has kind of blossomed into something a little bit more interesting, I think. So yeah, like personally, running a business and being an engineer means that there's this sort of constant struggle between the engineer in me and the businessman in me. But what I mean by that is that there's this constant desire to want to do things the right engineering way, but then you always have to trade that off between, what is the return on investment? Like what are my business outcomes that I'm trying to achieve by doing this engineering?
The engineer in you wants to achieve technical perfection, but the business person in you wants to make money.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess we should maybe go into like what is technical debt. Let's talk a little bit about technical debt and stuff like this in general, and then we can maybe go into some specifics about our.
When I think of technical debt, the first phrase that comes to my mind is like, it seemed like a good idea at the time, right? I think, it's those things that you do with good intentions that just over time didn't continue to scale, which is, just a normal kind of outgrowth of scaling, or over time became an obviously bad decision based on new information. So you just have to like change your mind and go back and fix it.
Yeah, I tend to also kind of throw maintenance costs in there. Like there's like extra things that you have to do that kind of come with the technical decisions that you make. And so like things like, like putting off, like deferring some things like maintenance costs, like for instance, like on Rails, like a Rails upgrade, for instance. I know if you can kind of like get behind on those or like push them down the road, and those can kind of build up and turn into like a large overhead that you have to think about all at once, which to me is technical debt. And there's all kinds of maintenance costs, I think, associated with software or infrastructure.
That's interesting because my take on technical debt is maybe a little bit more specific. I've always considered technical debt as a way to buy time with shitty code, right? Mm-hmm. When we first launched Honey Badger, I felt that the market was super ripe for a competitor in the space. So I felt like we really needed to ship something out very fast. And, as a result, we made some decisions that made us able to get to market much more quickly than we would have otherwise. But then maybe, a year or two later, we came to regret those decisions. Maybe we didn't really regret them. Maybe we just had to come back and clean them up a little bit. So one thing that we did that I think falls definitely into the category of technical debt is that when we started, our service, for people who don't know, is a exception monitoring service, right? We have a little snippet or it's not a snippet, it's a library that goes into your application, and it sends us information whenever errors happen. And what we did when we first started out was we actually used the library of the main competitor, which was totally legal because it was MIT licensed. And we always knew that we were going to replace this with our own library, and we got a little bit of flack for it. But in the end, I think it was sort of the right decision. What do you guys think about that decision?
I think it definitely bought us some time of not having to like figure all that stuff or reinvent that wheel, basically, since it was a pretty well-established pattern. And if you look at those same libraries today, of all everyone who does this basically, they're pretty much all doing, they're all basically copies of each other. Maybe not direct copies, but they're basically doing the exact same thing. It's a pretty well-established pattern of code. So it definitely helped us get to market quicker. And like you said, it's MIT licensed. So we included attribution and all that stuff.
Yeah, I guess we should say it was MIT licensed before we did that.
Yeah.
They changed the license, which I don't really blame them for. But it took a while. Like, Josh, you were the one who was in charge of version 2 of the gym, like our big version of the gym that was 100% developed by you.
Right.
How long did that take? That took a while, didn't it?
Yeah, it took a number of months. It was not a small project. I know by the time we got to that point, obviously there were a number of reasons we wanted to rewrite that code or re-implement it. We wanted to kind of custom tailor some things to our particular service. By that time, we had made enough decisions with the service where we kind of knew where we wanted to go, and we could kind of bring that to the client side. And it made sense to redo it. And it also gave us the opportunity to rethink some of the decisions that we didn't get to make as a result of using that code from someone else up front. So that probably added a little time to the project, but I think overall it was useful to us.
Yeah, so it saved us several months maybe coming out of the gate.
I think like it would have been, I mean, we obviously wouldn't have started with probably all the features that came with it initially either. So I think that a lot of the time it probably saved it saved us. It would have been incrementally over the first year or two of building the product, that we didn't have to really think about building in or coming up with how this thing should work. It just kind of worked out of the box initially anyway.
We no longer support the original notifier, but like how long do we keep support of that in our application? Do we still have that?
Probably too long. I think we still have some code for it. I don't know that anyone's actually using it.
Like if I sent an error payload from like 2000 and 2012, would it work?
That's it. I don't know. What do you think, Ben?
There's a good chance it would actually work. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
I think we do have the one of the way we supported it was we basically implemented the same API server side, and then the gem just basically you change the host name that it connects to, and it works.
Yeah, and I think you became really well acquainted with some of the problems with this original library, which started out, I guess, as a much simpler thing. All legacy software grows and becomes more complicated, and it's always kind of nice. And it's, I guess engineers always want to rewrite their big thing. And you kind of got a chance to do that because we started with something that we knew we were going to have to rewrite in the beginning. I
like what you said there about technical debt from the perspective of it's a shortcut that we choose to make that, saves us some time. But one of those examples, I think, that from our experience that I was talking about, like it's a good idea at the time, was when we started off with Backbone. Right. And we had
you're not going to remind me of this, Ben. I've blocked this out.
But those are fun times. I mean, like everyone at the time, web developers, it was like the new hotness to build a single page app. Like React wasn't a thing yet, as far as I know. And so like it was this brave new world, right? Let's try this new thing. And so you Star, actually, because you did all the JavaScript.
I'll own it. Sure. Yeah. Whatever. I make mistakes, Ben. I'm not perfect. Yeah.
Well, and as developers, I mean, we don't want to fall behind the times. We want to be able to learn and grow and stay current and all that. So I'm sure it was kind of fun, like frontier for you to explore.
Well, that's the point I was trying to make, that it wasn't a mistake, right? It was a good idea at the time. Like it sounded like a good idea because it was fun to build and it was what other people were doing and it was a good experiment and it worked. It's just over time we decided it's not working so well for us, and so we had to go back and replace that.
Oh, see, I'm much more harsher in my. I'm much harsher in my evaluation of my decision there. I think it did sound like a good idea at the time, but it was a wrong decision.
I tend to agree. I think that for us, it was the wrong decision just because what we know now of the extra overhead that it takes to maintain, especially at the time, like Backbone was not, it had a lot to like work out that like modern, like today's frameworks have solved, I think. So there was a lot to struggle with in addition, but that compared to if we had just gone with basically vanilla JavaScript in the Rails way, which isn't flashy, but works year after year. I think that's what would have made it a better decision for us to kind of go the more standard approach, just because we're a small team and everyone knows.
I mean, maybe I should back up and give a little perspective for people who are listening. So when we first started out, we wanted a really awesome application. And so we chose to build it as a single page application using this library, Backbone.js. This was before React. This was before, Angular, Vue, any of the modern front-end libraries. So the problem with building our application as a single page application using Backbone wasn't necessarily that it was hard to build using Backbone. The problem was that we had built this system which only one person, me, knew how to sort of use and work with. And so as time went on, I had to move on to other things because we're 3 developers. We're all doing a lot of different things. We all have to be able to interact with all parts of the system. And it became just more and more obvious that it was very hard for everybody to be able to work with this front-end application code that I had built, just because it was so complex. It was like its own separate application. Having a separate single page application was incredibly difficult to maintain for 3 full stack developers and no independent, full-time front end guys. So that was our main mistake. So I guess maybe this one sort of canceled out whatever time we gained from using the air brake gem originally, huh?
It probably did. Can I just make one point? And I might probably get on a soapbox here, so I'll try not to.
That's fine. Do it.
So if we went Backbone, if you look today at the number of people that are building Backbone applications, how many would you say that are doing that?
New Backbone applications?
Exactly.
Nobody.
I mean, it seems to me that anyone who was building a Backbone application back then is probably ported to a different framework entirely. I would guess, like React or something like that. If you're going to use the latest hot front end thing, there's a good chance that you're going to want to use the next hot thing that comes along to replace it.
Okay, and Josh, no. So we got to fight about this, right? Backbone was the way, right? Yeah. Backbone was the way. It was the way to write front end apps. And it turned out we were just wrong, and then it turned out that Angular was the way, right?
Right.
But you know what? Nobody's perfect. So still wrong. Now React. But I'm pretty sure
React is definitely the way, though. I mean, we can all agree on that, right?
It's 100%.
Okay. Meanwhile, JavaScript and Rails still works. It's maybe not, it's not super fancy.
Maybe if you're an old man, Josh.
Well, maybe I am an old man, Star.
I'm older than you, though. So,
well. Maybe we're both old men then. In any case, Rails and JavaScript has treated us pretty well. I think we could all agree it's treated us pretty well over the years, in that we all know it. It's all basic, it's built on basic web technologies that don't really have a whole lot of overhead. There's a little bit, but comparatively, it's done pretty well for us, I think.
And so the punchline for this, the end result was I went back, I ported the whole single page application into sort of a vanilla Rails application with it's got a pretty extensive amount of JavaScript layered on top of it, but for the most part, it works without JavaScript. I think that's the perfect thing for us because it's easy for us to maintain. It's easy for us to understand and onboard people who need to work on it. And then frankly, I don't think our application is a very good fit for a single page application. Why? Because a single page in our application has a huge amount of data that we have to go in and sort of extract and format and everything, and just sending that over the wire and having that happen front end is just kind of weird to me,
Yeah, and the other thing that I've told people in the past is that the usage pattern of how people like to interact with Honey Badger is our strategy is to keep people out of Honey Badger for the most part. In that, it's kind of issue based. So if they get a notification that an error has happened, then they want to come and look at Honey Badger to see what the error is and debug it. But other than that, ideally, they're not going to have to be in there all the time. Hopefully, they're going to be able to be working on code and deploying features and that sort of thing. So it's not the sort of app that people have open in a tab 24/7 or whatever. So what they're doing is usually clicking on a link from a notification and landing in Honey Badger. And if you're putting all of your if all of your performance benefits are being loaded up front, so with a single page app, a lot of the time you'll load a lot of the application logic up front, and then if you're in the app for a long time, it seems faster, right?
I think people get in, get out, right? Instead of loading up all this data and all the supporting structure that a single page app requires, load the world kind of thing. We just load the page they want to view, the data they want to see, and then they move on with their life, right?
You're right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, on that note, on the data thing, I think maybe a better example to make my point about would be Postgres, right? We decided early on to go with Postgres as our data store. It's been a great decision. We're still using Postgres. but we've changed how we use it over time, right? Because initially we stored everything in Postgres.
Yeah, we just had a basic Rails CRUD app, right?
Yeah.
Our highly data intensive application where we handle thousands of inbound errors and everything. Originally, our first version of that was a Rails CRUD app with everything, all the default Postgres settings, pretty much everything vanilla, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, we didn't even have a queue in the beginning, right? We took a request from a payload, but put it right in the database.
Straight to the database.
But over time that didn't scale. And so we had to make changes. We had to add a queue. And then over time we decided, you know what, maybe putting these 10 megabyte payloads inside the database isn't a good idea anymore. And so we split that out to S3, right? So then we just stored a reference to that in Postgres.
How big was our database? I remember it got pretty big.
That was about 2 terabytes.
Yeah, that was right after I did a RailsConf talk about scaling up your database.
Yeah.
Like everybody talks about, scaling out your database and moving things onto different servers and whatnot. But, just buy a bigger database. It's cool.
Which we did a few times.
Yeah, we did that a couple times.
I think the real breaking point for me was when I realized it would take a full 24 hours to restore a database, to production if we had to do a full restore. I'm like, you know what? We need to do something about that.
Well, doing that, splitting out those larger payloads has allowed us to maintain that scaling strategy for Postgres for the most part. We're not sharding or anything like that. We basically are just buying a bigger database. It's just that our database happens to be smaller.
Yeah. One other thing that I think I pushed for this one too, in the beginning, I didn't really want to be on AWS because at the time we launched Honey Badger, there were all these sort of really public AWS outages. It just seemed kind of sketchy to me. They hadn't launched this entire ecosystem of cloud services. It was pretty much just EC2. So we decided to go with a dedicated server, or several dedicated servers at a host that I don't know. Can we legally name them?
No, let's not. That'd be nice.
Okay, if we legally name them, we're going to get sued because they were so incredibly terrible.
I think that was a great decision early on because A, it was cheap. B, it was easy to get started. And they did support our needs for quite a while. It was only once we actually scaled a bit that we discovered the limits of their service, right? So they were great for a while until they weren't, right? So,
yeah.
I mean, it wasn't
they were
horrible.
Pretty bad.
Yeah. At the end there, it was like, pulling teeth and stuff. But it wasn't a universally bad experience.
No, but it took us forever to get off of them. We eventually moved everything over to EC2. We use a lot of AWS services along with it. And how long did that take you, Ben? Like that took a really long time.
Yeah. I mean, I think several months. The thing about AWS is everything has to be automated. Like when you're using EC2, those instances can disappear anytime. And the one good thing about that hosting company was that those servers just didn't disappear, right? They were rock solid. They lasted forever. So automation isn't so important when your server is going to be there. But
they disappeared occasionally for a few seconds at a time. But they were still there, but we just couldn't see them.
Right. So, it took definitely a bit of work to move to AWS. So, if we were to do it again, I think, the math might be a little different. Like knowing how much work it took to actually make that change, having done that up front would have been nice. But then how long would that have delayed our launch? That's the question.
Do you think it would have delayed our launch to launch on like EC2 and AWS?
No, because they probably would
everything?
have done it naively, right? From like, let's just throw some instances. It's fine. And then like one day they would have disappeared and we'd be like, oh, crud, it's not fine anymore.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's exactly what we would have done.
That does sound like us. Did I mention that we've learned a few things?
Yeah.
So and one of the benefits of AWS for us now is that we have this super awesome scaling setup where if we have more notices come in than we can handle, we just spin up more servers and it all just kind of happens automatically. Like, one of the most intense evenings of my life was where we're in the middle of all these. It was some sort of scaling problem with our old servers, our old dedicated servers, and I was at some conference that night. I couldn't sleep. I eventually finally got to sleep. I was woken up by like an alarm call from my home alarm company saying somebody was trying to break into my house. So then like I call my wife who's at the house and we're, freaking out and she's trying to figure out what's going on. And then, okay, that's done. So I go back to sleep and then I get a call or I get a page from, because I was on call. I get paged by our, PagerDuty setup because the database is like is acting weird or something. And then, okay, get that done. And then an hour later, I go back to sleep for an hour and I get up and I have to give a presentation. I'm like the first person in the morning, and it's on my personal time zone. It's like 4 a.m.
So that's my absolute nightmare.
Oh man, and it turned out okay. The presentation went okay, I think. But man, that was pretty stressful.
One of the lessons learned from that is now we don't assign on call when you're traveling for a conference, right?
Right. Yeah, I don't know if I've heard that. Like, knew it was that bad, but sorry, Star.
Oh, it's okay. It wasn't like that all the time. It just was this perfect storm of.
Yeah, we've definitely had the benefits from the automation work that we had to do for Amazon. Like, so now we don't get pages in the middle of the night when we're traveling on a conference, right? It just handles itself. Like,
we don't hardly get any pages at all. It just works.
A+ would do again.
In order to get to this point, though, we obviously we weren't to this point back then, or we would have built it like this in the first place. And so what we have today has come out of a lot of the mistakes and the experience that we've gained from doing things the wrong way. And so I assume we would have probably made our share of mistakes on any platform that we would have started on, and would still be here talking about like what we did wrong and what we wish we would have done in the beginning.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it comes down to like, what is the pragmatic thing that gets the job done today versus what's the ideal solution that I would love to have for the next 10 years, right? When we started, it was really one server. It cost us $75 a month, and boom, we launched because we had.
Yeah, and that was our entire infrastructure cost.
Yeah, totally.
Data, everything.
We had no idea, right?
Now we spent like six figures on servers.
But at the time when we launched, we had no idea if people would actually pay us for the service, right? We were just like, we don't know. Will this work? Let's do the cheapest thing that could possibly work, right? And as soon as we started making $100 a month, then we started talking about, okay, now can we buy another server?
I remember thinking you were such a baller for dropping like $75 a month on that server, Ben.
Good times. Good memories.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the idea of building to solve your problem today, not building to solve your problem of like 5 or 10 years from now or something,
Right.
And I think that kind of goes into what you were saying about taking the pragmatic approach. And that's kind of part of pragmatism, is that like, you're not like solving for needs that you don't have yet, basically.
I was thinking about that approach when it comes to software development, like less from the outside, more from the software side. And, the concept of you aren't going to need it, right? Like, it took me a while in my career to really, I think, accept that particular mentality that you don't need to build in all the extensibility from day one, right? You can just build a thing that works today and then rebuild it when you need to, or if you need to, as opposed to like spending a whole bunch of time up front trying to anticipate every potential variation, that you have to deal with.
And that also has helped us focus on our customers, because we didn't build a bunch of stuff that we thought they wanted. We waited and built things that they specifically told us they wanted. So if it doesn't do exactly what they want from day one, at least they can tell you what they want it to do, versus you kind of making those decisions for them.
So yeah, in the end, you all guys think that
hey,
like,
here,
how do you
right?
think we did? Think we did okay?
Yeah.
We're still in business. So yeah, I think we did all right.
Yeah, we're still learning, but that's like we were saying, like, that kind of goes with the territory.
For the past several years, we've sort of kicked around the idea of doing another product. And I think this is going to be maybe something that we have to watch ourselves on if we ever do develop another product, that we want to do everything right. And we want to apply all the lessons that we learned while building Honey Badger. But we also maybe need to realize that we're not going to be able to get everything right from the beginning, and that it's okay to do things to take on a little bit of technical debt at the beginning. All right. Well, it was really great talking with you guys about the whole technical debt thing, and I'll catch you next week, and we can talk about something else that
sounds good,
cool, and fun.
FounderQuest is a weekly podcast by the founders of Honey Badger. Zero instrumentation, 360-degree coverage of errors, outages, and service degradations for your web apps. If you have a web app, you need it. Available at honeybadger.io. Want more from the founders? Go to FounderQuestPodcast.com. That's one word. You can access our huge back catalog, or sign up for our newsletter to get exclusive VIP content. FounderQuest is available on iTunes, Spotify, and other purveyors of fine podcasts. We'll see you next week.